across radio, television, and social media, reaching thousands every single day. Imagine your message airing multiple times daily, plus a live on-air feature to promote your special offers, and added visibility on our dynamic Facebook platform. Whether you choose radio, TV, or both, you'll stay in the minds of customers who are making those all-important Mother's Day purchases. Call our sales department at 465-2621 today and secure your advertising solution.
Get ready to ignite your Tuesday nights with a show that's as educational as it is entertaining. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse, your weekly guide to the world of sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Only on ZIZ Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and I'm so happy to have you with me for another Tuesday, another conversation about sex and something. But as usual, before I get into tonight's topic, I like to give you all a little minute, a little 30 seconds at the start of the show to get your snacks, tell everybody Pleasure Pulse is live. So we'll take a short break and come back and talk about what we have to talk about today. So stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. We good. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and you're tuned into ZIZ 96.1. Or maybe you are listening, watching us on YouTube, social media, or through the website. And I'm happy to have you here with me for another conversation. Tonight, it's a solo conversation, just me and you. We're talking about a few things, but mainly consent. And of course, we've talked about consent in lots of different ways before. It is not new to the show, not new to you. We use the word, we know the meanings. We talk about it, have experienced it, practice it in our everyday lives. So when we talk about consent, consent is not something that's exclusive to sexual activity. Of course, we give consent to things in our daily lives every day. Do you want potato salad with your chicken? Or do you prefer rice? Do you want food at all? Or would you prefer to go hungry? Do you want to have a drink? Do you want to drink alcohol? Do you want to drink a non-alcoholic beverage? Right now, I'm on my non-alcoholic, trying to have a dry 2026. It's not totally working. I hope some of you, maybe you having a dry year, are doing better than I am. But, we push on. So consent is an everyday part of our lives, a part of our everyday, our daily work, our daily communications, conversations, exchanges, engagements with people. Consent also is deeply, inherently involved in sexual activity because everything we do, anything we do when it comes to sex has to be consensual. There has to be a question asked and a question answered, whether that is affirmative, yes, or negative, no, right? And where this is coming from for me, I I've been thinking about this recently a lot. You know, this thing that we say when we say silence is consent. I know we typically don't mean it typically in relation to sexual activity. It comes up in, like, if you're having a conversation with somebody, a meeting, a session, or whatever, and we throw out certain questions, ask for comments or whatever. We are trying to make a decision, and we go in here, there, and we ask people what they think. And we don't get a response. We might be like, okay, silence means they're okay with whatever we're proposing. But I've been challenging that idea a bit, especially this week. And in a conversation I had recently with somebody, you know, we were talking about how silence in a space could be due to a lot of things. Of course, it could be due to things like fear. So there might be a threat in front of us. Or sometimes, even when there is not an active or direct threat in front of us, because of our experiences in a particular situation, with a particular person, a pattern, we practice silence even when there's no active threat, right? So sometimes silence becomes something that we are used to. And we definitely need to interrogate that a bit, you know? Think about where that comes from. Think about what we need to be able to heal from the experiences that have convinced us that silence is the best way to approach certain situations, right? Especially if we're talking about silence as an everyday practice. Is it that we feel like the spaces we're in aren't safe enough, aren't comfortable enough? We don't feel like our voice matters or will be heard and respected in that moment. So that's for us to do some work, you know, and it might mean, is this space and we do better in a different space? It might mean that we have to practice using our voice and that agency. So I saw a video the other day with somebody talking about other crimes. Like, they were saying that with crimes like robbery, assault with a weapon, kidnapping, things like that, that the expectation is that the victim will do, the expectation and the allowance is that the victim will do whatever they need to survive. But the person was saying that this is often not the same with sexual assault. And with with sexual assault, people often ask, you know, why you didn't fight back, why you didn't say no, why you didn't speak up. They expect to sometimes see defensive wounds. People ask why you didn't fight back and things like that. And it had me more broadly thinking about how we say jokingly that silence, or casually, that silence is consent. As I mentioned, we typically don't, I'm saying that hesitantly, we typically don't apply it to sexual assault, though I've definitely heard some people express kind of those kinds of thoughts. And I remember, you know, years ago, campaigns around sexual assault were like, just say no, and it's just, you know, say no. It was really focused on verbalizing a no and thinking that verbalizing or saying that no was enough to prevent or stop sexual assault. I think we've come far from then to accept that there are many ways that sexual assault shows up in many different contexts with different people involved. We've seen how statistics and research increasingly show that it is often somebody you know and less often a complete stranger. So that adds that familial layer to things. We know that people are assaulted when they're unconscious. We know that people experience things like drugging or non-consensual substance inclusion. And I was looking recently at some work that CNN is doing to uncover these websites where, we're talking the dark web, kind of, I guess, where people, men, husbands, are posting about drugging their wives and sexually assaulting them. And there was this famous case of this French woman whose husband was sentenced because he had been drugging her for years and inviting people to sexually assault her. So that just connects to, the ways in which you might not get an active nor a fight back. And I think it's important to discuss this, especially in this month. As I mentioned last week, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, because we have to start thinking about, think more deeply about what sexual assault really means, what really are the roots of sexual assault, how we can ingrain things like consent into our daily practice, and in very sometimes small ways, even in our conversations, and especially in our conversations with the young people and the children around us, how we communicate that consent should be taken on fully as a daily and a committed practice, right? And things like including opening up, giving people the option to the child an option to decide what they want to wear, asking them if you can hug them, if you can touch them, letting them know who is okay to be able to touch them or hug them or things like that, but always with their consent. In doctors' offices, ensuring that doctors also know that it's important to ask for permission too, that you don't just access people's bodies, touch people's bodies without without first asking them and letting them know what it is you're about to do. So we'll also get into things like informed consent, because it is important to let people know what you're thinking about, let people know what is going to happen if it's the case of a medical procedure or whatever, and allowing them to opt out, because that is what consent is about, sharing information so that people can opt in or opt out. And it's important to recognize that relying on silence as consent often ignores things like power dynamics, where a person may feel unable to say no. And I kind of said that earlier, where I alluded to certain environments where people might not feel comfortable to, or might not be able to say no. When we're talking about sexual activity, sexual spaces, anything less than a clear yes should be considered a no. And a clear yes can come in many different ways. Things like being in a relationship does not grant automatic consent. Prior sexual activity with a person does not grant automatic sexual consent, even if that prior activity was 5 minutes ago. Because you could have sex with somebody 5 minutes ago and decide you don't want to take them out, or you decide whatever it is they're putting down, you don't want to take up, right? That is important to understand when we're talking about consent. So consent is voluntary, it should be fully understood, and clearly communicated. It focuses on active participation rather than passive inaction. And some folks developed the FRIES model for consent, FRIES, and sometimes there's an additional S. Freely given. It is a choice that is made without pressure, coercion, or manipulation. It's reversible. Anybody can change their mind and withdraw consent at any time, even during the act. And sometimes we're like, we're messaging and we're hype, we're getting into it, blah, 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 blah. And when you finally reach together, you're just like, I ain't feeling it anymore. That consent or that non-consent is valid in that case too, right? The person has not consent, even if they had a lot of things to say, a lot of things to go on with, were into it at the time. Perhaps, it could be anything, and you don't need a reason, right? Perhaps you want to understand more information to ensure that you are fully respecting people's boundaries, you didn't cross any line with anything, not a conversation that is intended to convince them otherwise, because remember, consent should also be free of coercion and convincing, pressing, being like, come na man, just this, blah, 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 blah. That is coercion. That is pressure. So anybody can change their mind and withdraw consent at any time. So you could be in the middle of things, at the height of things, and the person just hop off and they're like, man, I just, yeah, that's valid, right? And that should be respected. Consent should also be informed. So we have F, R, and we add I now. Informed. You know exactly what you are consenting to, and there is full disclosure and clarity. Enthusiastic, and in my sex education certification, we also talked about embodied consent. So some people talk about the E being enthusiastic, some people talk about the E being embodied. I will kind of share both and tell you what some of the differences are. But essentially, consent should be active, clear, and eager, not just the absence of a no. For enthusiastic, and for embodied, you feel it in the body. So you listen, you are fully in tune with what your body truly wants or desires, and that is what is motivating your consent or not. S, consent should be specific. So consenting to one act does not mean consenting to others. And it connects to informed consent too, because we have to know what is we consenting to. We have to know that this act does not inherently or automatically dive into another act. So you know how American TV talk about first base and second base and so let's consider consent for first base does not mean consent for second base. So consent for kissing does not mean consent for touching or massaging or using your hands in other places. That's not what it means. And sometimes people add an extra S for safety, or sometimes to emphasize that consent is ongoing. So essentially, consent should be or is informed, embodied, and an unambiguous agreement to something. So let me talk about each a little bit more. When we say consent should be freely given, it should be clear. So a clear, yes, I want to do this. A clear, that feels good. I like that. A clear, yeah, let's continue. Let's take it to the next, if you're okay with it, level or whatever. Active engagement in the activity could be initiating the contact, smiling, making eye contact with the person. If the person is looking away, it could mean a lot of different things. And so that's also why in consent, and we talk about the ongoing nature of consent, there should always be check-ins, right? Like sometimes people don't verbalize what it is their bodies are communicating. So you have to be fully in tuned when you're in any sexual activity with anybody. So if somebody's looking away, it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, it could be they're feeling something really intense and they're really enjoying it, and so they fully are going into their bodies or whatever. It could mean that they're feeling discomfort or pain. It could mean that something is going on with the connection or whatever. So it's important to take a pause there and be like, how are you feeling? Do you like this? Do you want me to stop? Should I keep going? Whatever it is. And that applies to other nonverbal cues. So are people nodding? If, let's say, you're trying to kiss or whatever, if one person stays here, the other person is doing all the movement, that might be something that you want to, probe and investigate a little bit further. It might be a sign that we're not equally interested in this thing, or it might be something that you agreed, like a vibe that you agreed you want to create. But either way, everybody should be knowledgeable about what's happening, and everybody should be okay with what's happening. And of course, ongoing, and the consent isn't just one person expressing yes or no to something. It is everybody involved in that experience continuing to communicate. So it is reciprocal, right? Because on any level, there can be pushing of the boundaries, an action that, people weren't totally expecting or okay with. So consent should be deeply intertwined with communication, and it should be going on from everybody's level. In terms of reversible consent, so we have F, it's freely given, and people express that they want to do it. It's without coercion or pressure. If somebody caves in or gives in, I'll say, all right then, that's not freely given consent. Consent is reversible. So as I mentioned, people could stop mid-act. People could come to your house in lingerie, a big coat and nothing under it, and then decide they ain't feeling it anymore. So people can stop mid-act. People could set specific boundaries. So they could say, I want to do this, but I don't want to do this. Or they could say, I want to do this, but I don't want to do this. And then when you start to do the thing that they said they wanted to, they're like, actually may not care with that anymore. People can also change their minds, but that changing minds in a positive way or in an affirmative way should be, as I mentioned, without coercion. Or you could be kissing or whatever, and so another partner suggests that you take it a step further or whatever, and maybe depending on how it is said, the pressing or whatever given for it, you're saying, no, I may even want to kiss anymore. That also is valid consent. People can pause for safety or comfort, so people could pause, ask to change positions because something hurts. Things like that should definitely be respected. Something feels uncomfortable, or they've changed their mind about a specific thing. So for example, let's say you've been talking about doing fellatio, oral sex, for a while. You've been talking about it for 2 weeks now, and every day, you build up to it or whatever. And then come to, as we say, the time come, and everybody appears to be ready, and then the person is like, that's also valid consent, right? And that should be respected. People could withdraw consent. People could change their minds, even if they had agreed to the activity earlier, even if they had done it before. So they could do something before and come and be like, you suggest it, and they're like, actually, no, I don't want to do it again for whatever reasons, and all of the reasons are valid. They could consent to activity, but not the method. And this is important for especially things like barrier or condom use, because consent to sex with a condom is not the same as consent to sex without a condom. Those are different agreements that have to be discussed differently. So we go back to informed consent, right? So if one person's intention is to have sex without a condom and the other person is under the impression that the person has a condom on, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So people could really want to have sex with you, but not really want to have sex without a condom with you. So all of those things, can connect to consent being reversible. So they could agree to the activity, but not the method. And that's important to discuss as well. For example, another example is birth control. Somebody could consent to having sex without a barrier once the other person, if it's a heterosexual, once the risk of pregnancy is involved. Somebody could consent to sex without a condom once there's birth control, but not sex without a condom if there's not birth control. So those are also important conversations that we have to ensure that everybody in the room is on the same page. So that's freely given, that's reversible. Consent should also be informed. So this is the I in phrase. It is a free, voluntary, and knowledgeable agreement to engage in specific sexual activity where everybody understands the acts, the risks, the contraception, and so involved, as we mentioned, if there's a risk of pregnancy, a possibility of pregnancy, and so on. It is ongoing. So every act or activity, action that you take requires its own informed consent because everything has its different risks and realities, right? Some things might be statistically less risky than others. Some people might be more okay to doing those things. So it also shouldn't be like a broad brush. If you're okay with taking this risk, then you should be okay with taking all the risks, right? Like that's not how it works. And whatever this information that the partners should know should be communicated verbally or through clear actions, and it can be given under certain circumstances, like if the person is incapacitated, coerced, threatened, sleeping, unconscious, whatever it is. Like if a person is in any of those states, then they cannot give informed consent. So everybody should know what they're agreeing to, including conversations around disclosures and so on. How will y'all treat with that? What is the kind of information you might like to know from your partner? What is the kind of information you think a partner should know and you feel comfortable sharing? And that also means that we should create environments where people feel safe to disclose, because part of the reason that people don't disclose is that there's a lot of stigma and there's potentially violence, there's potentially shame, there's exclusion, marginalization, all of those things possibly when they disclose, right? So we have to create the environment where people feel more comfortable to share with us, if they want, what their status is, and where we are equipped with the tools and knowledge and resources to also keep ourselves safer, and reduce the risk of transmission of certain STIs and so on. And essentially, for informed consent, the American Sexual Health Association says that informed consent means that there are no surprises and consent can be rescinded at any point, especially under changing conditions. So an example, you could kiss me, but I don't want to do X. I saw this example on a Reddit thread too, where they said they had sex with somebody new. They did or didn't use barriers. Oh, it's someone giving an example of what informed consent looks like. Not that they practiced it, they were in the situation themselves, but like they are creating a template for what you might say as an example of informed consent. So it was, hey partner, I recently had sex with somebody new, and this is if you have a sexual relationship with this person that you're calling a partner. I recently had sex with someone new. We didn't use barriers. I'm letting you know so that you have all the information you need in order to consent to having sex with me again, and what precautions you might want to put in place to protect your own sexual health. So it doesn't mean asking permission of one another or of telling people what it is you're about to do necessarily, but it is about informing your partners that there are probably risks involved so that they have all they need to make a decision for themselves. And somebody responded to that and said that their ex had a real problem with the informed part of consent, in that anytime they ever asked for anything, they would withhold information that they thought might make the person say no, and felt justified in doing that. Like, withholding was a rational thing to do. And they gave the example of COVID. Because remember in COVID, I'm not sure if it was happening here so much, but I definitely saw it a lot in relationships online, in conversations online, in situations online, the risk of COVID. Like, you live with somebody who has COVID and then you come over to my house without telling me that the person that you live with has COVID. And so there is a risk that you might be, transmitting COVID to me and so on, so on, so. And doing it because you know that if you disclose, they might decide differently. So if you disclose, they might like that you come or things like that. And that is something that we definitely don't want to be happening in our relationships. Like, you shouldn't be selective with the information because you are looking for a particular outcome. That is also a form of coercion and violence. We'll take a short break here. Give myself a pause. You can think about that so far. The phrase we've done, I think, half. Freely given, reversible, and informed. When we come back, we will continue with embodied or enthusiastic and specific and sometimes on the other S. So stay tuned.
Mother's Day is here, and ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation is ready to help you connect with shoppers. With our Mother's Day advertising special, your business gets powerful exposure across radio, television, and social media, reaching thousands every single day. Imagine your message airing multiple times daily, plus a live on-air feature to promote your special offers, and added visibility on our dynamic Facebook platform. Whether you choose radio, TV, or both, you'll stay in the minds of customers who are making those all-important Mother's Day purchases. Call our sales department at 465-2621 today and secure your advertising solution.
Welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. Tonight we're talking about consent, breaking down the phrase model, telling you a little bit more about what each letter means and entails with some examples. So we've discussed so far consent as something that is freely given, reversible, and informed. Now we move into consent as embodied or enthusiastic, slash and enthusiastic, slash or enthusiastic, specific, and maybe we'll do the additional S. So, enthusiastic consent is something that probably features in a lot of conversations that we'll have around consent. I learned about enthusiastic consent first, or consent as enthusiastic, and then after a while, I learned too about consent as potentially being embodied, or looking at the embodiedness of consent instead of the enthusiasm of consent. And the example that my facilitator for this sex ed course gave, which is where I mentioned I learned about embodied consent, was sometimes people are interested in trying a thing, in doing a thing, but they might have very valid, I'll say, reservations, little anxiety, some little feelings around the thing that they really do want to try, because it might be the first time trying it. It might be the first time trying it with this person. It might be the first time trying it in a particular way, in a particular setting. Like, for example, I know it's illegal, but having sex outside. Somebody might be totally fine to have sex inside all the time, and then they might be like, oh, I want to try having sex outside. Nobody locked me up and me ain't getting out on these spots or anything. But they might, even though they really want to have the sex outside, still be a little like, oh, I wonder if anybody come in, I wonder if anybody can see us, blah, 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 blah. But they're still interested in and want to try the thing. So that example, really started to make me think about whether enthusiastic is always a good way to define consent, because there could be some little fears, right? So that isn't to say let's count it out completely, because we definitely don't want situations where people are obviously body wise and have expressed a lack of interest in something, like they ain't excited about it at all. You know, like you got nerves, but you got good nerves, and then you got like really, really bad nerves, like terrible nerves, like debilitating. So we're talking about like the excited nerves. Like I feel it in my belly. I'm a little nervous, but I really want to do this thing. I'm nervous because I'm looking forward to the thing. So enthusiastic consent emphasizes an active, eager yes, ensuring typically desire and safety. Embodied consent focuses on feeling bodily sensations and truly wanting an action rather than just complying. Embodied consent focuses on internal somatic awareness and authenticity. So we're talking about things like internal physical sensations, and I put a plug here for Therapy for Black Girls. That was the first space that introduced me to the full body yes, and this is years ago, and I still practice it now, because sometimes it's like your mouth say yes but your body say no. So fully listening to, and me talking necessarily about sexual activity, I'm talking about somebody asks you to join a committee, somebody asks you to come on a walk, somebody asks you to go grocery shopping for them, to pick them up, to carry them somewhere, like all sorts of different things, right? So to be on a panel, you know, like so much, right? There are so many reasons that we might feel compelled to say yes when our bodies are saying this ain't aligned, this is not truly what we want. So it focuses on ongoing internal communication, which means that we have to slow down. So a couple weeks ago we had some girlies in here from the Sunset and Stillness Wellness Retreat, where we did a lot of slowing down, a lot of being in our bodies, a lot of connecting with everything, you know, our pelvic areas, our throats, our hearts, everything. But really connecting with our breath, right? Like really slowing down to assess where you're feeling a sensation or an emotion in your body. So that means that you had to do things like movement, breath work, and they also recommend using the wheel of consent. So I'm throwing that out for you to go and look it up yourself to distinguish between a few things. So this means, as I mentioned, you know, slowing down to feel. So fully experiencing sensations and allowing time to check if the feeling is truly a yes before proceeding, or if it is a no. Sometimes we rush through sex, but what would it mean to slow down? When we slow down, we can really feel what we're feeling, understand what we're feeling, adjust the actions and so to enhance those feelings or shift from them entirely. Checking in with body awareness. So does this really feel good in my body right now? Like sometimes it feels good in one part of our body but not in other parts of our body. So you had to pause to interrogate that and to understand like what that is really telling you and what it is really meaning. Sometimes our bodies let us know when we and a person in meshing well, right? Like our bodies react. If our nervous systems are always on alert around certain people, alert with certain people doing certain activities, that's important. Even if we might be saying, yeah, let's do whatever, you know, that's important to look into to see if we're saying yes, because whether it is we're attracted to the thought of the person, whether it is that we are there in a space because we've always been in this space and we've just been doing this for the last 10 years, so we'll just continue. So really checking in to hear, to listen to what our bodies are telling us. So as I mentioned, check out the Wheel of Consent to learn more about this embodied consent. And embodied consent can also, especially through breathwork and things like that, help you to feel things more deeply, especially if that's what you are desiring. Things like honoring no or maybe signals, respecting nonverbal signs of discomfort, such as people pushing you away, turning away, tensing muscles, or lack of reciprocation. All of those things connect. And you might want to set some intentions before you engage in whatever activity, experience. Let me say experience and not activity. Activity can sound like it's like one thing, but experience really, I think, encapsulates the vibe. But maybe that's just me of what we're trying to do here. So discussing what is desired, like, are we looking for connection? Like, is that really what I am here for, rather than a specific sexual goal? And that can help to reduce pressure, and that could also help us clarify what it is we really want in this situation. So is it that I'm saying yes to sex, but what I really want is a nice long cuddle? Is it that what I really want is a nice quiet meal with you and a conversation? Do I really just want us to hold hands, or maybe do I want us to just massage each other, like just touch each other on the outside, whatever it is? And then I saw this example saying yes, out of fear is not embodied consent. While our safety survival behaviors are absolutely valuable and often life-saving, when they become habitual in a relationship, it may be an indicator that there is something fundamentally unsafe about the relationship. I remember I talked about saying things out of habit earlier, like fear has become part of your normal conversations, experiences, and so on. Repeatedly saying yes when our nervous system is disrupted, either because we are intoxicated, fearful, or in any other way not ourselves, is not embodied consent. And I will say here too that sometimes when we realize we can only do certain things if we are in a certain state, that's also worth investigating, worth thinking about, and worth unpacking. So for example, if we can only have sex or have sex with certain people or whatever, if we are drunk or if we're high, if it's different, certain whatever, substance conditions are met and so on, because we have to make our nervous systems relax, because we can't naturally, relax them, or it could be a sign of something else going on in that situation that might need to be looked into. And we're not talking about people who actively choose and prefer, and maybe sometimes can only, based on whatever is going on in their bodies, experiences, and so on, have sex under certain conditions. We're talking about, like, if you didn't have those conditions, if you didn't have those substances or whatever, then you wouldn't. So that's worth thinking about some more. So the key difference is enthusiastic consent is about, this is from my readings online, the expression of desire, which is often external, and embodied consent is about the feeling of desire, which is internal or somatic. So it is what you show to the person versus what you feel in yourself, right? So worth thinking about, worth considering in terms of how we practice both, how we can tap into either of them a little bit more because maybe you're very much in your body and connected with your body, but you want to practice being able to say those things out loud. So it's for you to really think about and decide what are some of the things that I can work on to balance, to tap more into, whatever it is. And consent has to be specific. So it is asking for specific things. Is it okay if I touch your elbow? Is it okay if I give you a tight, close hug? Is it okay if I kiss you on the cheek? Sometimes, like, we go into other cultures where certain things are practice, are habit. I feel like here we're not necessarily very touchy-feely in terms of like hugs and stuff. Like, we don't do the kisses on the cheek, and so when we're greeting people, oftentimes when we're hugging people, it's very like distant kind of hugging. But sometimes you might meet somebody who is a hugger and you're not a hugger, and they approach you and they hug you instantly without asking a question. So consent has to be specific. Is it okay if I touch your nipples? Is it, and waiting, for the person to answer before you proceed. Is it okay if I take your pants off? Is it okay if I take my pants off? Because the person might not be there either. Checking in, so asking if they like this, asking if something, they still like something, asking if it's okay to continue, and continue don't mean graduate. Continue mean continue what it is you're doing. It could be the person telling you, yes, I would like you to speed up. I would like you to slow down, and listening and respecting all of that. Because remember, sex is about everybody who is in the situation, not just one person over here or one person over here or the third person over there. It's about everybody. So it's about ensuring that everybody feels safe, heard, respected, valued, appreciated, honored, all of that in that experience. It is explicit negotiation. So talking about certain things beforehand, such as things like condom or barrier use, right? It is not surprising. Remember, no surprises. Surprising people with something. And it's important to have these conversations before we get into sex, because one, we help to prevent a lot of the lines being blurred. We help to prevent boundaries or lines being crossed. And we can ensure that going into it, everybody is on the same page. You might want to agree on you should agree on what your boundaries are, but you might also want to agree on what signals you will give to express that a boundary is maybe sometimes you're pushing the boundary or you're nearing the boundary before you actually cross it. So you might want to be like, we're getting ahead of ourselves or whatever it is. So some kind of signal, whether that's a word, and they always suggest that you use words, especially in kink spaces. And I will tell you a little bit about kink as a good example, a good showing of consent, but they always talk about using signals or words that you wouldn't typically use in sex to communicate how it is you're feeling or what it is you want to happen. Like Scrabble, mango, things like that. Okay, so that was fries. Sorry, y'all are having a coughing fit. Let's take a break and come back. I had a little coughing fit, and it was good timing in that during sex, all sorts of things happen. And that also connects to consent because something could come up and people might have to stop. People might desire to stop. Somebody might have a coughing fit and need to stop. It's not an opportunity for you to keep going or to expect the person to push through whatever it is they're experiencing so that you can keep. No, after that, after the point of stop or no, or the discomfort in the body, the visual, physical cues that letting you know something is amiss. Yeah, at that point is when you stop, and you stop. You could talk about it, whatever, but you definitely should stop. So I mentioned that I wanted to just give kink its credit as a good space for practicing consent because there is a lot that goes into setting up a good for everybody kink or play scene. There's a lot of negotiation that's involved. There's a lot of conversation that is involved. There's a lot of discussion around expectations, interests, and limits. I don't know if we have them here somewhere on the ground, but in other places, you have like playhouses where people can go to engage in kink to play. And that could be with people that they don't know. It could be with their partner. It could be with somebody that they've been talking to online and they decide to meet up there, whatever it is. But there's a lot of conversation and agreement that happens there. And I remember I talked about things like safe words or signals. So coming up with a word, this is something that they do, especially for things like stop or pausing or slowing down or changing and so, because kink in certain kinds of play, people can be in all sorts of positions, right? And so to reduce the risk of harm, especially, it's important to have these conversations and to come up with these safe words or these signals, and also to regularly check in, especially if you are the one dominating and the person is on the receiving end of whatever it is. They could be bound, they could be gagged, they could be blindfolded, they could be tied up in some kind of way. It could be their first experience, it could be their 100th experience, but it's regularly checking in to ensure that everybody is okay, to ensure that everybody is still enjoying what it is that we're doing, to ensure that everybody wants to continue with what it is we're doing. And it is extremely important for, especially like the person dominating. People think dominating means that you're in control, but the person on the other end, the submissive, actually has a lot of the power and the control, because based on the situation, the position that they might be in, they really steer what happens, because they are also, most vulnerable in that situation. In kink, you have to do things like educating yourself. You really have to, so we talk about informed consent, you really have to know what it is you're getting into. Whatever kind of play that is. Sensation play. Even sometimes, we might use substances to enhance the whatever feeling that we're feeling, but we have to be very clear about dosage, about side effects, about how things could affect us differently based on whether we eat or eat, use it with other substances, things like that. Not that kink is necessarily, about using substances, but just in case that is part of that or any other non-kink situation. Like education and knowledge are critical to ensure people's safety, to prevent injury or emotional harm too, especially if people are going into positions that they've never been in or playing roles that they've never played before, ensuring that like things ain't going too far, that I still feel like a human being, and so that should be respected after it and so I don't feel humiliated or demeaned or anything like that. But all of those need to be talked about, because maybe you do want to feel humiliated and demeaned, so you have to talk about like what your lines are there. Have to have the right equipment, have to have the right setup, materials that are safe for your body. Some people suggest practicing beforehand, especially if you're new to certain types of things, to ensure that you can do it safely, and knowing your partners. And I'm going to stop there, because I think knowing the people that you're having any kind of sexual experience with, and knowing them, mean that you know their family, you know where they live, you know where they come from, you know their birthday and all of that. So, but knowing that you are both on the same page when it comes to respecting each other and respecting people, when it comes to respecting and honoring consent, when it comes to the actions or activities that you should do when it comes to respecting boundaries. So it's important that you know who you're having sex, you know what you're getting into, and it's important too that we are forthcoming about that kind of information with the persons with whom we have sex. So with fries, I hope that I've given you some guidance, maybe reminders, a framework for thinking about consent in sexual activity, outside of sexual activity. I found that practicing consent in sex in all of these ways, honoring consent in sex in all of these ways too, is a good way to practice it in other parts of our lives, or maybe vice versa, right? Like we build up that consent muscle and we start to ask for consent and start to give consent for all sorts of things. Like, is it okay if I call you later, right? Like, is it okay if we speak right now? Is this a good time for XYZ, blah, 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 right? So incorporate it into your everyday practice and see how much more it can enhance your sexual pleasure and your sexual experiences. And I will leave you with that. I will see you all next Tuesday. Thank you for joining me for another conversation about sex and something. This was Sex and Fries, Sex and Chicken and Chips. And with that, I will see you all later. Have a pleasurable evening as usual. Bye.